This week's video for our lecture video is going to look at modern world history as it begins in Asia. And with this, I think it's very important for us to understand that for a world history course, we need to make sure that we're not too focused on the West. And when we talk about the West, we're thinking about places like Europe as well as later the United States. I want us to really start this class by understanding that there are many different regions that we are going to be examining, one of which is going to, of course, be towards what might be referred to as the East and thinking about China, Japan, and other parts of Asia. So with this, the first thing I want us to discuss is kind of a review from what might have been covered in World History 1. And of course, that's going to be changes that take place in the Song Dynasty. So with the Song Dynasty, you don't have to go back and learn everything about the previous dynasties in China for this course, but it is important to understand that as the Chinese population expands and as they eventually shift further to the south after fighting with the Zheng Dynasty and creating a capital further south, there's a lot of changes that take place. Sometimes this is going to be referred to as the Commercial Revolution, and there's a couple of important factors. So one of those is going to be a switch in their diet, and that switch is going to be from wheat and millet to rice. With this, they are going to use a strain of rice that can be produced twice per year, so doubling the amount of food production is very important. The more calories people can consume, the more they're able to do in these early civilizations, and it also leads to a growth in the population. So with that commercial revolution, something else that takes place is that they are going to switch from this hard currency, which would have been made out of metal, so different types of coins, to a paper currency, one of the first parts of the world to do this very successfully. And that's pretty important with this. So you see a change in food production, you see a change in currency, and you also start to see some very early, almost factory-like systems that emerge as far as producing things like iron and steel. And as they produce this iron and steel, what they're able to do is to bring workers into one set location to work on that production, and they are paid basically a wage for this. So again, a very early factory style system without some of the factory tools you might associate later on. Now, for the Song Dynasty, they are able to hold out against the Mongols for a limited period of time, but as with many civilizations, they are not going to be able to hold out against the Mongols forever. So for the Mongols, they are going to be a group of Mongolians who are going to be united under Genghis Khan, and as the Mongols are united, they will then turn their sights outwards and they are going to conquer many parts of the world. I have a picture up here that shows you what the Mongol Empire looked like around 1290 CE, and this is very impressive. And if we think about time frame, when we think 1290, we're thinking just a little bit more than a couple hundred years before Columbus and the creation of these different empires in the Americas. So, timeline-wise, this is very impressive and very important. So, as far as the Mongols in China, they are able to take control of the Southern Song Dynasty and create the Yuan Dynasty around 1271, and this dynasty will last until around 1368. Again, a very impressive timeline for how long they are able to be established. As far as their establishment, in 1271, Kublai Khan, who would have been the grandson of Genghis Khan, was able to finally defeat the Chinese army. And for the Mongols, they do not want to completely overthrow the Chinese government. Something else that's very important to understand with China at this point is that they are going to have a bureaucracy that is based mostly on merit. So while your emperor position might be something hereditary, many of the people who work in the Chinese bureaucracy, they are going to be able to gain these positions based on education. Now, of course, there are at times throughout Chinese history going to be instances of corruption, maybe someone being able to pay for a position, but regardless of that, the people still had to have an education and had to understand the law of the land, so to speak, at least to some degree. And so with that, that's very important because in other parts of the world, they don't have this. So if we think about Europe in 1271, you're thinking about a system that is mostly going to be controlled by greater lords and lesser lords, a system where people are going to inherit their positions from a family member. It doesn't really matter if they are suited for the position. So this sort of meritocracy that they have is very unique for this time. So for the Mongols, they do not get rid of a lot of the government positions. Instead, they are going to keep them in place. But there is, of course, going to be a lot of Chinese resentment here. So by the time the Mongols take power, they actually put an end to around 100 years of warfare that had been taking place in China. And so with that, of course, there's a lot of people who thought they might come out on top, that they would be the new ruling family, and they are definitely going to be resentful of the Mongols. A lot of the Chinese people, even those who might have been towards the bottom of the social ladder, they sort of resented the Mongols because they weren't ethnically Chinese. They weren't like them in many respects, whether it be their dress, their hairstyles, the way they ate, the way that they understood the world, in some cases even their acceptance of different religious beliefs. And so with this, there is going to be some resentment. But in order to really understand the Yuan Dynasty, I want us to just quickly look at some of their achievements as well as some of their failures, because some of these achievements actually lead to the Chinese Age of Exploration that we will talk about in just a second. For the Yuan Dynasty, as far as some of their achievements, we can see that as far as trade, they are going to expand the Silk Road trade in China. I have a map here that shows you what the Silk Road trade looked like under the Han Empire. So this is going to be very important. What we can see is that with China, they are going to be one of the most eastern hubs for the Silk Road trade. And from China, you are going to see a lot of goods that are traded. We're thinking about goods that can be found nowhere else in the world. We're thinking things like gunpowder, silk, goods that will spread and eventually be created in other parts of the world, like paper, woodblock printing, very important, but also, of course, different food goods, different consumable goods like tea as well. And this is connecting China in with many other parts of the known world at this time. So you can see connections here with other parts of Asia into India. Of course, a lot of this will extend into the Indian Ocean trade. You can see that there near the Arabian Peninsula and the coast of Africa. So places in here becoming very wealthy as well off of this trade, and also into what is listed here as the Roman Empire, but just Europe as a whole. So for the Yuan Dynasty, they, as well as the Mongol Empire as a whole, put a massive emphasis on trade. Trade is where they are going to make their money through different things like taxes. It's how they're going to get their goods sold. It's how they're going to become profitable. And so because of that, a lot of trade goods will end up coming into China that maybe previously had not. In addition to that, not only are goods going to be traded, but it's also very important to note that for the Mongols, they very much wanted to learn as much as they could from everyone. If you think about the Mongols today, you don't, regardless of the fact that they have this largest based land empire that we have seen, that doesn't necessarily mean that their culture really spread. If you think about it today, you probably don't know people who practice the shaman religion that the Mongols would have practiced. They don't speak Mongolian. However, what they did do in sort of contrast to that is they actually started to bring people in from all different parts of the empire to learn from them and to adopt a lot of their culture and a lot of their ways. And as they did so, for the Yuan Dynasty, they are actually going to have a lot of Islamic scholars who are going to teach them new advancements as far as math and with different things like algebra and geometry. They teach them different things about medicine and different medical practices. Cartography, mapping out the known world, was very important. And of course, they also will have more advancements when it comes to their ships. So how to create a ship that can travel further, ships that are larger, learning new navigational techniques, so with astronomy, but as well as with improving and better understanding how to use compasses and astrolabes, also very important. Now, up here, I have these achievements. You've got the trade. You've got the end of 100 years of war. They also create a massive capital in what is now Beijing, would have been referred to then as Dadu, and they also are very important for continuing the circulation of paper money. As far as the Yuan Dynasty, some of the negatives, one time it was said that for the Mongols, one of the hardest things that they faced and what ultimately probably led to part of their downfall was the fact that it was very hard for these horsemen to rule from horseback. And when they started to settle down in various regions, whether it be in the land of the Rus, whether it be in China, wherever it is, they have a very hard time at times trying to figure out how to be bureaucrats, basically. And so with that, they are going to very heavily tax people, and they have to because they have spent far too much money. There were many of the Mongolian rulers who were very into lavish goods, lavish materials, very expensive buildings. I mean, Beijing was a very, very well-constructed city. And in addition to that, they also spent a lot of money trying to figure out how to conquer Japan. Now, with Japan, this is another area where we can see that they are going to have a lot of issues. So for the Mongol invasions of Japan, they took place in 1274 as well as 1281. And this is going to happen when Kublai Khan, they're going to send 2 fleets to Korea. From Korea and China, and in both of these cases, whether it be 1274 or 1281, the Japanese, and especially their samurai warriors, were able to very vigorously defend their shores, and they also run into typhoons, which is ultimately what leads to an end of the exploration and expeditions into Japan by the Mongols. So with that, that's going to basically be part of what is going to bring them to their end. It's also, of course, going to be the time where the Ming Dynasty will eventually rise. Now, with the Ming Dynasty, the person that I have pictured up here, he is originally going to be known as Zhu Yongsheng. He will later be referred to as Emperor Hongwu. So, spoiler alert, he is able to become the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty. But for Yongsheng, before he becomes the emperor, he was actually born into a plague time. So, the Mongols and all of this trade, while great for bringing in new advancements and new learning and technology, also did bring in the plague. And with this, for Yongsheng, his family is going to die from the plague. Now, after that, he is going to be sent to a Buddhist monastery to live and to learn, and eventually a group known as the Red Turbans actually comes to the monastery. They are looting, they are raiding, and they destroy it. And for Yongsheng, rather than being bitter about this, he sees an opportunity. He wants to be like these Red Turbans in a way. They are fighting back against the Mongols. They are taking what they can. They are trying to reestablish an ethnically Chinese emperor, and he sees an opportunity to find people that he believes are more like him and to work his way up in the system. And eventually he does become their leader. Now, in 1368, he is going to lead troops to the north from the southernmost parts of China, and they are able to chase the Yuans out of the capital of Dadu. When they do this, they will take control. He is going to claim the mandate of heaven, meaning that he is going to be instated as Emperor Hongwu. Now, for Emperor Hongwu, he does many different things. He is going to reign from 1368 with the fall of the Mongols, and he will rule until around 1398. So it's a very long, expansive rule. For Hongwu, he is going to eliminate the vestiges of the Mongols. He sends his brother to actually live in the capital or former capital of Beijing or Dadu in order to keep an eye on the Mongols to ensure that they are not going to effectively try to rise up or try to regain power. He does implement some changes to try to make the government a little bit more favorable to those who have the most merit, and he is going to eliminate a lot of his rivals. And in addition to that, he plants more trees, and I mean a lot of trees. I mean, he planted millions of trees. He also wanted to make sure to do public works projects that were beneficial for the masses. So with this, one thing he does is he builds a lot of dikes and irrigation systems. He repaired more than 41,000 reservoirs throughout China, and he really understood his roots. Even before his family died of plague, he didn't come from the wealthiest family, and he had seen how the rule of the Mongols and their inability to collectively spend taxes well had impacted the common person, and he wanted to ensure that he avoided this. With this, you are going to see a massive population boom from around 60 to 100 million people. This is going to bring China back to the sort of post or pre-plague numbers and to soar even further beyond that. Now, upon his death, he is going to actually instate his grandson, Yongli, into power. Now, when Yongli comes to power, this will not happen until around 1403. First, he has to fight his uncle, Zhu Di, for power. Now, this is the same uncle that had been sent into Dadu in order to ensure that the Mongols did not rise up again, and when he does this, he believes he should be the next emperor. But Yang Li, having been appointed, is eventually able to win with the help of eunuch fighters. And also, just to be clear, these eunuchs, these are people that have been castrated, but they do serve the emperor. It is assumed that because they have been castrated, that they will be increasingly loyal to him as opposed to their own families or their own desires. And they also often in world history are trusted around not only the emperor, but also protecting his family. Now, one eunuch in particular who is going to be very important is going to be Zheng He. Now, for Zheng He, he is going to lead some of the greatest expeditions of all time, and definitely some of the greatest of the age, or the greatest of the age, we should say. And with this, he has a lot of trust from Yang Li. And for Yang Li, he wants to expand and to receive tribute from other parts of the world. So what he does is he is actually going to have Zheng He go out with around 62 large ships. These are sometimes referred to as the floating city because altogether, I mean, they did probably look like a floating city coming into a region. And with this, not only are they going to have these large ships, but around 28,000 men and soldiers are going to go on these journeys. The first expedition happens in 1405, and it's important to understand how impressive these ships are. So here, just to give you a comparison, this is a picture of a scaled model of what Zheng He ships would have looked like as opposed to Christopher Columbus's ships. So you can see that with 62 of these, that would have absolutely looked like a floating city. And that's just the large ships. We're also got to think about the fact that there's many other smaller ships that are also going to be taken. I think they had around 200 smaller ships that went with them as well. So very, very impressive, particularly for the age. But with this exploration, they are going to create many tributary states, but these are not colonies. And for China, they don't really need colonies at this point. They're not seeking more land. They're not necessarily seeking to extract resources or to grow a cash crop. Instead, they want to exact tribute from people who are already living in these areas and also to establish better trade patterns. So they are going to be trading for a lot of things that are more exotic, things that the Chinese people might be interested in, things like ivory, different spices, exotic woods for their capital city and for the wealthy, animals like zebras and giraffes. And so with that, it's very different from what exploration might look like later. They go to many different places like Burma and India, and for Zheng He, he is so trusted by Yang Li that he is actually going to be given blank scrolls, meaning that he can sign his own trade agreements. He is in charge of making decisions spur of the moment. And I think it's also important that not only are they not creating colonies, but they're also not trying to spread their religion as well. They are much more interested in trade, tribute, and trying to establish more connections. Here I have the 7 voyages of Zheng He that are sort of laid out so that you can see them. We can see that they are going to be trading into many different parts of the world, into different land masses, different water masses. And I think it's very important to understand that this takes place over the course of several years. And this happens far before you get to the exploration of Europeans into the New World. This is something that Europeans did not have the technology for yet in 1433. They would get there quickly, but they didn't have it yet. But as far as what really is going to sort of happen as far as the Ming Dynasty, they do eventually turn in on themselves. One of the main things is that they had spent a lot of money on not only these explorations, but also on creating Beijing out of Dadu. I later referred to sometimes as the Forbidden City also. We can see that there's a lot of money that is being put into campaigns for border protection. So we can see that there's a lot of Mongol presence in different khanates, different groups of Mongols that are still on the Ming border, which means that they have to be very, very careful not to have outsiders try to invade or attack. And so with that, for the Ming Dynasty, they do eventually start a process where China is going to turn in on itself. Eventually, they will completely decline. We can see that the Qing Dynasty will rise to power a little bit later, but for now, it's just important to understand that over the course of the latter Ming and into the Qing Dynasty, they will start to close in and to become more isolationist. But regardless, I hope that you have learned something from this video. I hope that you are going to have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you in the next video.